There's no paper. Si può avere la carta per scrivere? Ah, ok, no, me lo dà lui. One.
I'll give you two.
No, ce l'ho appena.
So one.
Grazie.
One?
I don't want you. It's okay. One is okay.
You have another one too. Right on.
5 minutes. Yeah.
Chairman, how long did we speak?
Well, we have 1 hour and a half, and you are 1, 2, 3, 4. Say 15 minutes?
15,
Okay.
I'll probably be around 10, 12.
Well, I'll say
very good.
at least 10.
Yes.
But not.
We need to leave enough time.
Ambassador, thank you.
خلاص يعني.
So,
الست دي كلمت ضد قطر، واحد قطري سمع بيقول انه هيرد عليها النهارده. لا هيرد عليه ما اعرفش. انا هحاول اوقف الموضوع ده.
posso veramente concentrarmi su questo dopo, perché sennò adesso non recepisco. Grazie.
مرات هجمت قطر.
Ambassador. Quando facciamo questo seminario strategico in Egitto? Do you remember that we discussed this?
Good morning, everyone.
عندك presentation on okay.
We have a very interesting panel, and as you're going to see, we have speakers who are really well versed in everything they're going to say. But allow me at the beginning really to, on behalf of all my colleagues here in this panel, to thank the NATO Defense College Foundation for this meeting, which allows us, who are coming from the Arab world and those who are coming from the rest of the world, to exchange views and try to see if we have common thoughts about how things will develop. With your permission, I will make few brief remarks, then I will give the floor to the very distinguished panelists on my right and on my left. Many states in the last 6 years have witnessed unprecedented turmoil and upheaval in the Arab region. The genesis of this phenomena was sometimes referred to as the Arab Spring. We heard some views about that yesterday, about the various consequences that came out of it. It's not easy to generalize what led to such explosions, but one can safely point out to some internal and some external factors. Let me start with the internal factors, such as the absence of good governance. We are in the 21st century. All people in the world expect that you have a responsible government. This phenomenon was symbolized by presidents for life. Such rulers managed to extend their mandates, and in some cases, arrangements for the creation of a dynasty was underway. Similar to the North Korean example, for example. The legitimacy of such rulers was always in doubt. It is worth noting that the so-called Arab Spring did not occur in any monarchy in the Arab world, only in republics where the legitimacy of the leaders was always in doubt, or the leaders have assumed power in doubtful circumstances. Then there are, of course, a lot of external military interventions. I'll mention some, but I'm sure that my colleagues here will elaborate on all that. The first, I will start with, we believe deeply that the first really external attack on the area happened in 1948 with the creation of Israel. But that was some time ago. We have now the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, which was met by massive US and some Arab countries supported normally. There was an invasion of Afghanistan. Resistant fighters were consequently returned to their countries and created havoc. I think Madame Ben Shahida yesterday mentioned what happened in Algeria. I would say the same happened in my country in 1997. There was a tremendous massacre of tourists in Luxor, coming from people who were coming from Afghanistan. This produced what has been referred to as the Mujahideen phenomena. Then we have the US misguided invasion of Iraq, which resulted in chaotic conditions and the emergency of terrorist organization in Iraq. The situation in Iraq has not stabilized up till now. They have so many problems, but you can trace it up to the invasion and what happened after the invasion of Iraq. Then, of course, we have the Syrian tragedy, which in turn produced untold misery for the population of Syria, for different countries, for the phenomena of massive immigration into Europe, and unprecedented terrorism in the area. The Syrian tragedy could have been dealt with very early. And I will venture to say that in December 2011, the Arab League managed to sign the protocol with the government of Bashar al-Assad for a ceasefire and for the introduction of observers. They were not military observers, they were civilian and military. And when they were there, they were covering 16 cities and towns, 16. And when they were there was no fighting in the morning. There was some sniper firing when they go home. And this went on for a couple of weeks, about a month or slightly more. And then all of a sudden, some countries decided to withdraw their observers, and things deteriorated, as you all know. I went twice to the Security Council to ask for a ceasefire. The Security Council, since 1945, whenever there is fighting, 10, 20, 30, 100 die, they order a ceasefire. And it could be monitored, and they could introduce peacekeeping forces, but they refrained. I was even very much embarrassed that in the second time, one ambassador told me, Secretary General, why are you coming? You already came and you didn't get what you want. Then I have to say that the use of force has occurred frequently in several conflicts. Suffice to mention, as I said, Syria and Libya. But however, it was always proxy wars. The real power behind these wars did not appear in the battlefield. It was probably proxy wars, and the Security Council should have exercised its charter responsibility here. Here I would like to add one thought, which was not mentioned yesterday, but I'm sure it will come. The failure of the United Nations collective security system. We are living, supposedly, in an organized world. The Charter of the United Nations brought a plan for world peace, and the Security Council is authorized to use military force even to ensure that peace prevails. This did not happen. The Charter was supposed to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. This utopian system has hitherto failed to materialize. The only exception, perhaps maybe there were some other, will point to other exceptions. The only exception was in 1990 when Iraq invaded and annexed Kuwait, when the Security Council adopted Resolution 678, which called for the use of force to ensure withdrawal of Iraqi forces. This could happen in other places when there is invasion, but that does not happen. Such clear-cut response by the Security Council has not regrettably materialized ever since. I would not consider what happened in Ukraine, though I don't want to get into that, as an exception, because in the Charter itself, it's built in that the 5 permanent members can stop any resolution, so you don't expect anything to come against one of them. The use of force, however, has occurred frequently in several conflicts, and this, I repeat again, there should have been different action, ceasefire, and an order of urgent monitored presence. But leaving conflicts to fester and to deteriorate is contrary to world peace and contrary to the Charter of the United Nations. I do not, having lived with many of the efforts by the United Nations and in various places to send a representative and try to manage a conflict. One of the problems which we suffer from everywhere, at least in the Middle East, is the managed problem not to end conflicts. And that applies, of course, to Palestine. What we get is always a long series of resolutions never carried out, and matters gets worse and worse. I think what is needed now is a new approach on both regional and international levels to focus on the problem and try to end it and not to continue to manage it. People suffer, and a lot of consequences could come through that. With your permission, I'll stop here, and I will give my colleagues in the panel the floor. I don't have it, who should start? Well, let me start. Yes, yeah. Okay. It's okay. I'll follow this here.
Partnership.
The same thing.
Well, the names here are not the names that we have here. But anyhow, I'll start then with my left, Ambassador Mahmoud Karim. Ambassador Karim was a very distinguished ambassador in the Egyptian Foreign Service. He served in many places, and actually one of his last posts was Brussels, where he was accredited to NATO. He has been doing many other things, including in human rights. He has played a very important role in human rights in Egypt. And he's an expert in disarmament and has been working with the Secretary General of the United Nations in disarmament matters. And I have a great pleasure to ask him to take the floor.
And the most important thing is being a very studious student of Ambassador Harbi from 1974 until now. A true mentor. I'm very honored to be in a panel chaired by Dr. Al-Arabi. You gave me a very difficult topic, a topic that everyone likes to avoid, which is the issue of cooperative security. Well, has cooperative security been discussed before in the Middle East? And if so, when, where, and what were the topics? And in the event of peace in the Middle East, can peace treaties contain cooperative security measures? I argue yes. And the example I'm giving is very well known, especially to one of the architects of the peace treaty between Egypt and Israel, Dr. Al-Arabi. When we say that within the Sinai itself, there were particular measures after the signing of the peace treaty on March 29, 1979, and the treaty itself contained specific actual measures of mutual security. They did not call it cooperative security per se, but it aimed to increase confidence between the parties, and Annex 1, Article 2 of the peace treaty itself determined final lines, numbers of military divisions, armored brigades, artillery checkpoints, periodic follow-up committee meetings, a liaison system to resolve disputes in 48 hours, and early warning systems. And the treaty, yes, did ask the United States for specific measures. But there were other important lessons as we continue, as we draw on where else cooperative security was used. I am using a rather flexible definition of cooperative security because in very difficult areas of conflict-torn regions, you have to be flexible and you have to be gradual, incremental, start bottom-up approach. And therefore, offering parties in an area of conflict a forum to cultivate dialogue, to discuss focal points of cooperation towards conflict resolution and conflict prevention, to nurture bold and new elements of a regional security framework, to increase confidence between the parties and friendship between the parties, leading to a practical cooperation measure. There were 3 successful attempts, in my view, on cooperative security. One of them, I believe, in NATO, and I was very lucky to be part of this success story, if I may say so, under the leadership of Ambassador Rizzo and Nicholas DeSantis, my dear colleague, were very important measures in the Mediterranean dialogue took place. The dialogue itself started at 1994, and it started with the aim to achieve mutual understanding and to dispel misconceptions and contribute to regional security. Pillars were political dialogue and practical cooperation measures. And this is very similar to my own definition of cooperative security. The dialogue itself was based on diversity, non-discrimination, non-imposition, self-differentiation, inclusiveness, complementarity, and mutual reinforcement. We will see that as the dialogue itself proceeded, the 7 MD states, the meetings with the foreign ministers, the meetings of the defense ministers in Taormina and Seville, the CHOD's meeting also took place. So there was a lot of inertia in this regard that was taking place under the umbrella of the Mediterranean dialogue. And some of the interesting cooperation ideas included disaster relief, search and rescue, peace support operations, intelligence sharing, active endeavor in the Mediterranean, for example, transparency with defense expenditure, civil emergency cooperation with the Euro-Atlantic Disaster Response Coordination Center, mass destruction weapons, and so on. So there is a plethora of very interesting ideas that were discussed in this regard. And of course, in the Middle East faculty in the NATO Defense College, officers and diplomats from different parts of our world came together to discuss and rehash these issues. There is another interesting example that we sometimes forget, which is the offshoot of the Madrid Peace Conference, where the Madrid Peace Conference established 5 working groups, one of them on arms control and regional security. And there were 2 baskets in this arms control and regional security. The operational basket, specific confidence and security building measures, confidence building measures as we call them, and the conceptual basket for longer term issues in this regard. But if we look at the issues that were discussed at that time, you will find military information exchange, maritime confidence building measures, declaratory confidence building measures. What do you mean by declaratory confidence building, and how can you get the parties to agree to CBMs in our region? How can you be transparent in order to address the fears of the other party in this regard, and what measures you can take in order to dispel these fears by cooperating in the field of security, and of course verification measures. And there was a plethora of the problem with ACRS is that ACRS period was not well documented in the annals of history until today. Unfortunately, there has been very little written about ACRS in order to, and I think that this is very important for people who work, including myself, for people who worked in ACRS to present, to bring out these ideas to the world so that we can understand that we tried this before and we do not need to reinvent the wheel, and we can start from an interesting set of measures. The third measure that I want to address is a rather contentious measure which happened in 2010 after the Non-Proliferation Treaty took a decision to convene a conference by December 2012 on weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East and nuclear weapons. And the conference never succeeded. So as a result, some chose the beautiful village of Guillon in Switzerland to bring the Arabs, the Israelis, and the Iranians together to sit and discuss some of the issues that included confidence building measures. And some of these measures also, as you see from the table, intended to cultivate this kind of dialogue and to increase confidence. I'm leaving it behind me for you to read. I do not have time, but I want to conclude now by the prerequisites. Yes, there are fundamental prerequisites necessary for successful cooperative security in the Middle East. And these include that all parties should share an equal stake, believing in equal security for all, and that global problems are beyond the capacity of one single state. No one single state will be able to ensure collective security or even its own national security. There must be some sort of cooperation in this regard. And that the parties should be ready to move away from conceptual, idealistic actions to actual, concrete security measures on the ground. Clear and present political will of the parties, an undisputed ongoing peace process with negotiations and dialogues. This is very important. Open lines of communications, as Karl Deutsch mentioned many, many years ago. Mentors and shepherds, very important to assist the parties with fresh initiatives. Liaison machinery for monitoring, verification, and dispute settlement, and a national capacity. And that's important because as a result of ACRS, it was people who were working in ACRS criticized the countries involved that they did not use the opportunity of ACRS to develop, to culture, to nurture a capacity capable young boys and girls who are capable to work in that field. And I think this is, and of course the issue of incrementalism. But at present, unfortunately, there are no security dialogue among the parties in the Middle East. The security predicaments of the region warrants a structured process based on equal and common security for all, rehashing of military doctrines, reversal of military expenditure for economic and social development, and solving pending political problems. The region needs a dialogue. In many cases, the enemy is the same for all. Terrorist groups pose the same threat to Israel as well as to Arabs alike. And I have always said this to Odette, sitting right in front of me when we were working as ambassadors in Geneva, and we both agreed on that the enemy is the same, and that we have to work together in order to confront the enemy. But how far can you circumvent deep political differences on major issues like the Palestinian issues, for example, on cooperative security contingent on progress in the political field? Therefore, in the absence of any format, I therefore call that NATO Defense College in Rome remains the only venue that can perform this task. And it is a very important obligation that I place very clearly on NATO Defense College because I know that there is a lot that they can achieve in terms of search and rescue, communication skills, inspection, verification, military information exchange, advanced confidence building measures, and so on. And there is a need in NATO Defense College and in other areas to stress the issue of cyber vulnerability, a construct of regional cyber security regime, especially with many nations in the Middle East acquiring peaceful nuclear capabilities in accordance with Article 4 of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So if you build nuclear power plants, you also must develop parallel to that a construct of a sound cyber security and cooperation in illegal immigration, and maximizing, of course, our own foundation, the NATO Defense College Foundation, as well as NATO's policy of public diplomacy, to introduce to the region a series of seminars on this issue, drawing from what transpired in Europe and lessons from this presentation. NATO has an important peace-building role in the determination and the development of a culture of peace in our region. I thank you.
I thank Ambassador Karim for a very instructive and important statement. I think he gave us an example of brevity also. So I hope everyone will take care of that. The next speaker is Christian Koch, Director of the Gulf Research Center Foundation in Geneva. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Good morning to everybody. Certainly it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. And the fact that you're holding the conference in Rome is, of course, icing on the cake. So it's very nice always to be here. Let me focus a little bit on where I see the reasons of why we don't have very much cooperative security in the region at the moment, and then maybe offer some thoughts about what we can do to overcome that. As Ambassador Karim rightfully said at the end of his presentation there, at the moment we don't see security dialogue being practiced in the region. I don't think there's a collective view of the numerous challenges and threats that the region faces. I don't see multilateralism really playing a role. And I see there's no really level of coordination, whether at the nation-state level, whether at the sub-regional level in the Middle East, whether at the regional level as a whole. So given that situation and really this tremendous challenge of unprecedented turmoil, devastated societies, breakdown of institutions, non-functioning regional order, it's a tough task ahead. And to move now to forms of cooperative security, it's a little bit hard to fathom how we go forward. Why are we in this situation? Well, I think I can sort of outline 5 reasons that I see mainly responsible or that lay at the bottom of this current predicament. Certainly, I don't think there are, among all the actors in the region, and whether that's local actors, regional actors, international actors, we don't see any common political objectives. For example, the United States and Russia have different objectives when it comes to Syria. Russia intervened in order to save the presidency of President Assad. The Americans are there to provide, save the regime, but not the person itself. Others in the region want to see the regime collapse. So different political objectives. We see the same thing, for example, on the issue of terrorism. Yes, it's a threat that is supposed to combine everybody else, but everybody also has the different definition of terrorism. And everybody pursues, in that sense, slightly different policies at least. And in the Gulf itself, in the GCC, we have different policies, for example, on Muslim Brotherhood, as another example of lack of political objectives overall. So we have many of these examples, and I think without these common political objectives, it becomes extremely difficult to establish even a minimal consensus. And I think that word hasn't been mentioned enough, is consensus. How to build consensus, how to construct consensus, and how to get people to start agreeing even on minimal conception of moving forward. It's a tough undertaking, and it's not being practiced at all. I think much more focus needs to be placed on how to construct some of these consensus. The second reason, of course, is, and we've heard a lot of this in the debate even yesterday, is the whole disintegration of the state, the breakdown of the regional order, the fragmentation we see in Libya, Syria, Yemen, Iraq, the instability that is still there and that could at any moment further deteriorate in Egypt, Algeria, Lebanon, Jordan. All of this has then opened the space for the rise of the violent non-state actor. And I think that's been a critical component of not looking at how to construct cooperative security. Yemen, we have this example of a militia taking over the state, dismembering the institutions, coming with an ideological agenda, and then supported by a regional power to try to undermine the security of the state. Dr. Mustafa yesterday talked about the Hezbollah in Lebanon being a militia being stronger than the state. All this, in the end, result is breakdown of the order, no inclusion, and again, no coherent state. The third reason I see really is this still preponderance of the zero-sum mentality. If I look at regional security, how it's defined at the moment, it's basically through a military paradigm, concentrated simply on mutual antagonisms, win-lose, balance of power approach. Everybody sort of agrees and says there's no military solution to the problems in the region, but then everybody pursues just such a military solution in the end. Again, very little effort here at trying to any sort of consensus building. But if we go back and remember the work of the Palmer Commission in the 1980s on the East-West conflicts on common security, it was very clear, it underlined that neither side can achieve security at the expense of the other. So that is something that needs to be thought of. Fourth, I think there's definitely also a lack of leadership at the international level. I mean, we can also say, of course, national and regional, but especially also in the international level, given that the Middle East is such a penetrated region and so impacted also by the policies of external powers. If we see, the region suffering today, the consequences of the U.S. decision to invade Iraq in 2003, and almost, I would have to say, like criminal negligence about watching of the post-invasion order in that country and see what has happened today. And compounding that, even with mistakes afterwards. Whether we talk about the Bush administration followed by the Obama administration going to the Trump administration. It's just a series of mistakes. The same thing, I mean, Russia's intervention in Syria, very narrow-minded, focused on, very confined national interests, very little concern actually for the situation on the ground, the aspirations of the Syrian people. So, and this concern and this uncertainty about what the major powers are doing has created additional uncertainty in the region itself, and has caused, for example, in the Gulf, we see countries acting much more actively on their own foreign policy, but not always, I would argue, for the better. But it has put states into the position of having to do things given that they don't know what others will do. So uncertainty, a big factor. And then the final reason, I think, is we also have it to do with an incredible weakness of international institutions. We can talk about this regionally. The Arab League, the Secretary General yesterday admitted quite frankly that the Arab League has been sidelined in many of the issues. The GCC, we see at the moment the crisis with Qatar. I think there's a question mark over the future of the GCC. Certainly, I think there's been some deep social cleavages that have been created, and it's going to be very difficult to overcome those. So weakness at the regional level. At the international level, the EU has been mentioned yesterday several times as a potential model, but I think the EU finds itself preoccupied with itself, not unsure of how it's going to act internationally and how it can contribute, even in its own neighborhood. I think the EU neighborhood policy is pretty much in shambles. So we have the situation where almost Europe is, the policies I see coming as of late is almost to keep the neighbors at a distance and keep it away and not look at how you establish real functioning partnerships in the end of the day. The UN, again, where the UN, we just heard about the failure of the UN in Syria with trying to promote ceasefire. Even in Yemen, we have the case where we have these suggestions that have been put forward to have the UN take care and take the Portal for Data under their guardianship, whether they can take over the running of the airport in Sana'a, and both times immediately the response from the UN has been to say no. So I think at the bottom line with all this, there is this sense, at least in the Middle East, that whether the outside world really cares about what happens in the Middle East, and whether we just leave developments as they are, and hopefully we can contain, which is of course a false notion. So where do we go from here? What needs to happen? Well, I think, one, of course, it all starts at home. And there's the emphasis has to be to get your own house in order. Mr. Chairman, you talked at the outset of the absence of good governance, certainly fundamental. But without having reforms and a more stable environment being created within the societies, it's very hard to have a foundation on which to build on to actually act on cooperatively, regionally. And in the end, this is an important factor. I mean, in the end, if cooperative security is going to actually find a place in the Middle East and start to work, it needs to have regional ownership. It needs to have the ownership in the region. This cannot simply be something imposed. But in order to have regional ownership, you need a stable foundation on which to build on. And so that requires a comprehensive approach, even domestically, the focus being on the key critical issues of social development, education, employment, infrastructure, providing social services, etc. I think a second step that we can look at is to more support for regional initiatives. I think there's this notion out there that the region is not really acting on its own, that it's not putting forward ideas of what can be done. I think that's not necessarily the case. You showed some examples of in the past what has happened. But I mentioned two other initiatives. One is the Arab Peace Initiative. This was the Arab Peace Initiative, put forward originally by King Abdullah in 2001. It's still out there. It's out there as a basis. But unfortunately, I think it was never acted on, also by our partners from Israel. So this is an initiative that should have been picked up on, should be acted upon. The second one is, I remember 2004, the former foreign minister of Saudi Arabia, Saud Faisal, spoke in Manama about his vision of Gulf security, talking about a stable Iraq, a friendly Iran, a unified GCC, a prosperous Yemen. It was it was a very worked out, fine regional proposal, and this could have served as a basis for further discussions. So these are things to act on. I think the region is coming up with some initiatives. They should be looked at more closely, and they should be supported. And then, of course, the third is that we really do need still the international community to act and not to pretend that or have this hope that the problems in the region will simply resolve themselves and that they're not having this impact even outside of the region. I think there is an argument to be made that international actors will need to be involved in order to help for stabilization in the Middle East. But I think this needs to be acted on more concretely on a number of fronts. We had yesterday the suggestion to have a UN resolution on the violent non-state actors. Again, I think there needs to be this support for regional initiatives coming out. There needs to be a concert, for example, in terms of a Marshall Plan being put together by the international community with the region, supported by both sides, again, to increase regional ownership. And in the end of the day, if we don't have the collective will of the international community, then there'll be legitimacy is missing, and without legitimacy, we're not going to achieve the overarching consensus that we actually need. So I think that, again, brings me back to consensus, squaring the circle that I've tried to set out at the outset. That's some few ideas on how to go forward. And thank you very much for the time.
Thank you. Next speaker is Ms. Ibtisam Al-Qadbi, President, Emirates Policy Center in Abu Dhabi. You have the floor now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I remember when you said Al-Qadbi, one time Mustafa Al-Fiqi, he was there and he said Al-Qibti. And they said, well, we want you to come this side. You are Ibtisam Al-Qadbi. I am coming from UAE. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. There is no doubt that reshaping a comprehensive security structure in the Middle East is an ambitious strategic prelude to improve the environment of security, stability, and prosperity in the region. So it's an issue that will leave positive impact on security and peace, not in the region itself, but in Europe and the whole world. So the adoption of any viable policies which are designed to move from chaos to stability and cooperative security in the Middle East must focus on cementing and stabilizing the nation state in the Arab world or in the Arab region by weakening all kinds of terrorist and extremist entities and militias. There is no doubt that regional and international efforts to support this endeavor until this moment have been successful enough, not successful enough to suggest the availability of elements of success to establish a new security environment in the Middle East that enjoys the minimum level of agreement among influential regional actors and the necessary international acceptance. Well, frankly speaking, and I always speak frankly, there is an increasingly spreading conviction in the Arab region which claims that United States and the Western actors and other major capitals are benefiting from the chaos and turmoil in the region, manipulating it in draining regional parties and signing the largest number of deals in trade and armaments. And this is what we are witnessing. And this is which keeps the crisis staying where it is. I think that the best formula to foster viable policies to shift from regional chaos to cooperative security more importantly, world major powers, notably US and Russia, should pursue a strategy to solve crises instead of only managing them. What we are witnessing is managing the crisis, not trying to solve the crisis. Furthermore, it would be something ambitious and exceptional if the international community and regional parties agree upon coherent, effective, and serious strategic plan to solve regional conflicts completely within the next decade in Syria, Yemen, Libya, and Palestine territories. This will deal a decisive blow to forces of terrorism and then cement cooperative security policies and shift from chaos to stability based on participation in designing a new security environment. To this end, we must deal with major obstacles that still prevent the realization of a new regional order in the Middle East, where wars, conflicts, and chaos retreat and replaced by reconstruction, development, improving standards of living, and fighting tyranny and extremism. These obstacles include maybe Chris touched some, Ambassador Karim touched some of them, but there is still no, first, there is still no a clear vision on the shape and nature of such regional structure and its implication, neither on an international level or on a regional level. Under current circumstances, we have seen no sign for forthcoming agreement between GCC, Iran, Turkey, and Egypt on some key issues associated with this move, like terrorism, ending chaos, promoting regional stability, and protecting gains of nation in the region. Second, the Iranian side has not responded positively to initiatives that boost collective security in the region, possibly promoted by its desire to achieve more strategic gains in Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon, and in Yemen also, in its bid to become a regional hegemony. Some argue that the deep resentments the U.S. harbors towards Iran regional policies was not translated into concrete pressure on Tehran to stop its destabilizing agenda in Syria, Yemen, Lebanon, and the Gulf region. And I was looking to the nuclear deal. It's a golden opportunity at that time. Obama administration could have a pressure Iran at that time, who was dying to reach this nuclear deal because of the economic situation, to at least pressure Iran to stop expanding in the region, just at least put the regional file beside the nuclear issue. At that time, Obama's administration were dying to reach the deal without paying any attention for what we are suffering in the region from Iranian expansion. So the creation of any regional security structure would require confidence-building measures to diffuse tension and conflict among regional competing stakeholders. But this is also needs a will from all parties. Unfortunately, this requirement has not been met by anybody, Iran or GCC nations, Egypt, Turkey. There seems to be no sign of such measures given the continuation of struggle in the region and division among nations over regional issues. Not to mention, of course, stakeholders, conflicting interests and agenda. And it seems that the major powers in the world also benefiting from this by not pressuring anybody to come on the table. In fact, as I said, they are more interested in deals. So far, there are no international actors willing to push for and guarantee the creation and implementation of such a structure. However, these actors wait to see regional stakeholders themselves agree on a formula for regional security, even without the emergence of a global initiative that defines the issue that need to be guaranteed by world major powers. This is particularly true since diffusing tension in the region should start by striking a balance in the ambitions of power between competing regional powers, as well as by bridging gap in their perception of the nature of common threats. That was proven true if we take, for example, the Syrian issue that has been shifted from a domestic regional context into an international one, and it seems also the Gulf, the crisis in Qatar also is becoming an international issue, rather a regional issue. So regional powers in the Middle East are currently facing structural flaws and challenges, as the Syrian issue has created shift in Turkey's relation with Russia and with US and with EU and Iran. Moreover, it seems that the current crisis between the Arab Quartet and Qatar has left a strong impact on the GCC Cooperation Council, as meeting of bodies and committees working under this regional organization have not been convened since the eruption of the crisis with Doha in June. In fact, I am also working as a member of consultative body of GCC, and our meeting also cancelled, supposed to meet the end of September, has been cancelled without any clue when it will be held. As for Egypt, its major political concern include the security of Sinai, economic hardship, and the Nile water issues and the negative impact of Libyan crisis. Nonetheless, the partnership between the Gulf region, Egypt, Iran, Turkey, and Israel for regional reintegration and development remains substantive and critical for better tomorrow. The need to change the rules of the game and shift from the politics of chaos to reintegration, stability, development, and cooperative security in the Middle East require deep shifts in the actor's position, as the strategic interaction between these actors in the past and their policies have eventually led to turmoil and crisis in the region. Thus, diffusing such crisis will necessarily depend on changing these negative policies in the first place. Last but not least, I would like to highlight two major points, if you allow me, Chairman, and the importance of building and maintaining a unified regional and global front to combat terrorism and extremism. Organizations such as ISIS and Nusra, Hezbollah, need to build a unified, with a clear vision, with a real strategy. So, moreover, Iran must be held accountable for supporting terrorism and extremism. Media outlets and platforms that promote terrorism and incite violence needs to be criminalized too. It's so important to look at the Gulf crisis with Qatar within this context. In other words, it has become necessary to counter the Iranian and also Qatar's destabilizing policies that support extremism and terrorists. If we didn't get the root causes of this extremism, the Palestinian issue, the Syrian issue, the Libyan issue, the Iraqis issue, which is not only belong to us, it has been exacerbated by, as Mr. Al-Arabi said, by the major power intervention in our region. It's not anymore our problem, rather than it is now becoming international problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our last speaker is really our host, in a sense. Mr. Nicolas DeSantis, head Middle East and North Africa section, NATO headquarters in Brussels. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I would like to add, of course, my thanks and appreciation to Ambassador Minuto Rizzo, all of his team, and the NATO Defense College Foundation for bringing together such an excellent, I think, gathering, throughout these 2 days of experts, practitioners, an adequate mix of academics, officials, and also, of course, a high caliber of participants. All of you have highlighted during 2 days the major challenges which affect this region, which are not born today. They go back 40 years, 50 years in this region, to say the least. But of course, have been complicated by a number of phenomena. Yesterday, Secretary General of the Arab League spoke about, the disintegration, due to conflict, the concept of a nation state. But these are phenomena that are not only dictated by this kind of dynamics. Globalization, for example, defines the fact that the economy is not run anymore by nation states. This transcends. Many are asking whether we can still define and we can still believe that there are national economies, or whether this is now something which has to be handled on a transnational level. Just to say that the concept of multilateralism, or cooperation, now transcends the only dimension of security. But of course, our panel today is about cooperative security. And cooperative security, I think, is the answer to pessimism. If one looks at all the things that have been discussed into these days, one would have to come to the conclusion that the Middle East is a region which is condemned by insecurity, instability, conflict, and poverty. Yes, it is true that we never had an Arab Spring. Some of you have highlighted yesterday. I remember I ran a team of people who have lived in the region, Arabic speaking, and NATO, when all of this erupted in 2011, I see some of you who were sharing this experience at the time. I never used in my analysis, the word Arab Spring, because it was a different phenomenon. But what was this phenomenon? It was a revolt against regimes which had not respected the human dignity, had not promoted the human dignity, had not promoted what a decent human beings have the right to have. This was at the basis of this. And when you go in the Middle East, you see also everywhere, also in the most poorer sections of town, everybody has a satellite dish. When you watch the images of how people live in other parts of the world, then you ask yourself, why can't I have that? And if we do not address this, this phenomenon will be reproduced again. And we will all pay consequences. Something that was said, is the West benefiting from chaos and disintegration in the Middle East? Nobody can benefit from this because our security, the security of Mediterranean, Middle Eastern countries, of Europe, of North America, are inextricably linked. So they affect each other. Today, this has become somewhat evident through the phenomenon of migration from North Africa and Africa, now affecting, also from Syria, affecting different parts of, let's say, the West, the so-called West, from Turkey, but also through Libya. So, and this is evident to everybody. But I don't think that anyone can enjoy today security in a world in which that security challenges have become transnational in character and affect us all. And that's why cooperative security. We started this experience 23 years ago. 23 years ago. The way we looked at it is the way we should be looking at it today again. Strategic patience. These challenges are not easy to be addressed. Nevertheless, as many of you have highlighted, they cannot be addressed by any single state alone. Not by the United States, not by Algeria, not by Italy, not by Tunisia, not by Turkey. That is why this requires a cooperative approach to security. What did we do 23 years ago when we started the Mediterranean dialogue? Well, we started in a way in which there were misperceptions about the West. Why the aims of the Mediterranean dialogue were dispel any misperceptions about the purpose of the alliance, an alliance which was transforming at the time, which could lead, said, to a misperception of a threat. NATO didn't have an enemy anymore. Communism had gone at the time, and we were trying to redefine the relations with the East. In fact, the concept of cooperative security starts with the Rome Summit in November 1991, when NATO did something extraordinary. It revised this strategic concept. Up until that moment, it was a highly classified document, and we made it public. And we told Russia and all the countries in Central and Eastern Europe, Russia was the enemy for NATO. NATO was the enemy for Russia. Let's build a new security order. We need to underline these passages because we tend to forget, and we shouldn't forget. We moved from confrontation to cooperation in the security sphere. In 1994, in January 1994, we launched the Partnership for Peace to reorganize the return into the family of democratic nations, the countries of Central and Eastern Europe, which had been unnaturally separated from the rest of Europe from totalitarian regimes which had denied the human dignity to their people, and they marched towards the rest of Europe to which they wanted to join. NATO helped reorganize the return into the family of democratic nations of these countries in a secure environment. 11 months later, we launched the Mediterranean Dialogue, the same cooperative approach to security. Difficult. There was a strong demand of NATO eastward. There was no demand of NATO in the south among Arab countries. NATO was viewed as a kind of Cold War relic trying to reinvent itself. Here we are 23 years later, where all Mediterranean dialogue countries have an individualized program for cooperation which responds to their specific needs in modernizing their defense and security institutions, and from Tunisia to Libya, they all ask for NATO cooperation. Even where there were the Arab revolutions, these countries in the Maghreb, in the Mashrak, are asking for more cooperation. Today we're training Tunisian special forces because we're helping them develop the defense and security institutions that are needed to face the threats that are affecting them. Egypt, we helped in Sinai for a 2-year project to do mine detection, in the Nile region. so that the civilian population of that region, by identifying the mines that the sands move, could develop an area which is so necessary for the quality of life of the Egyptian people. In Jordan, we've been distracting, obsolete, and all the remnants of war where civilian populations were affected. And we've built in Kuwait, in the Qatar, with the UAE, with the other countries, through the individual programs of the Istanbul Cooperation Initiative, a new cultural cooperation. Today, I see friends here. I see people we have built a security community. After 23 years, when we go to these countries, from Israel to Egypt to Algeria, we have interministerial committees which sit down with us and define together how we upgrade our cooperation. We assess together. This is something extraordinary. This is something extraordinary. This is cooperative security on a practical level. And this is, I think, the way in which we have to win the pessimism that seems to characterize. Of course, we need to identify the threats, the instabilities. We need to look at the security challenges and also the dynamics which have always prevented in the Middle East a regional dimension, that these issues would be addressed on a regional level, whether in the Maghreb, whether in the Mashriq, and I would say a region that goes from the Balkans to the Middle East, because it's that there are now a number of links between these areas for which we cannot talk about one single region, but rather the interconnections between different regions. And so when we look, for example, at the issue of complementarity, what we're doing in NATO is to promote also complementarity with other international institutions. Today, we're doing a pilot project with the European Union, NATO and the European Union, on Tunisia. How can we address NATO as a specific, I would say, as a niche, which is security? We help these countries modernize their defense institutions or build institutions like we're doing now, responding to the request of President al-Sarraj from Libya, where it's not modernization, it's not security sector reform. You cannot reform a security sector where it doesn't exist. So it's security institutions building. In Libya, upon the request of this government, first by the first elected government of Ali Zidane following the elections. Now with al-Sarraj, we're trying to help them build a Ministry of Defense, a Chief of Defense Staff, security services, to the benefit of whom? Not of one faction, but of the people. So the answer, the institutional answer that we can do, that we can give, points at complementarity. European Union can address socio-economic imbalances. I heard speaking about a Marshall Plan from the West and within the region yesterday. It's very important to understand that there's a lot of funds that go to the region, but there's no conditionality. Nobody's saying, if you don't do these reforms, which will improve the conditions and well-being of your people, you will not have access to this money. Perhaps this conditionality has to be introduced, because otherwise the root causes of the revolutions will reproduce themselves. And then we will have millions of people fleeing. Remember, the growth, the demographic growth in these countries. We saw migration first within the region, from rural areas to the cities. Now we see migration going outside. What is going to happen if people will not find jobs, will not find the possibility to send their children to school, to university, to have an education, so that they can perfect their societies? They can work within their societies to improve them. Well, it's natural they will go somewhere else. But when there's going to be millions, you will see this integration. You know how this is going to be done. So that's why cooperative security, a cooperative approach to security, to address in complementarity these issues. Of course, conflicts have to be solved and have to be addressed. Now, I must stress an aspect here that I heard several times: Libya. Well, let's not forget that there was a request by the foreign ministers of the Arab League for intervention in Libya. Let's not forget there was a request by the foreign ministers of the Gulf Cooperation Council There were 2 UN Security Council resolutions, UN Security Council Resolution 1970 and 1973, which asked and gave a specific mandate, not only for the air campaign, but for all necessary measures for the protection of civilians. People forget that when Secretary General Rasmussen went to Libya, and I invite you, go on the internet and do it. After the operation, we went on the ground, and the Secretary General was cheered by thousands of Libyans. The government of Ali Zidane asked for NATO help after. Help us build the institutions. Al-Sarraj is continuing this request. Of course, there's been mistakes made by all institutions. We didn't do in Libya what we did in Bosnia. That was a mistake. Should have stabilized the day after, but there was no appetite for this. The Arab League, after saying yes to their campaign, said no boots on the ground in Libya. And of course, all the other institutions, including NATO, didn't go with that. It didn't do the United Nations. It was not called by the GCC. It was not called by anyone. So let's also learn from our mistakes. Bosnia, Kosovo, very good examples of how you couple diplomacy and the use of force, but to go back to the political solution, not to use force in itself. In Libya, because of perhaps the impact that Iraq had also on Western countries, nobody wanted to pursue that option. Now we have to see the stabilizing means coupling diplomacy and the use of force, so that if you have situations where you need to act like we did in Bosnia, where you have paramilitary troops, take their weapons, put them in cantonment sites, and then spend 10 years to train their armed forces, because that's what we did in Bosnia. We stayed 10 years in this country to help them. We didn't do this in other countries because there is a certain fatigue also in the West, because issues are complex. That's why these initiatives are important. Political dialogue. These are 2 pillars of our cooperation. There is a practical dimension for which we're helping countries, but political dialogue is another one. And today we have cooperation bilaterally in the Mediterranean dialogue with each of the countries. We have bilateral cooperation with each of the countries in the Istanbul Cooperation Initiative with 4 of the 6 GCC states. So it's bilateral. It means that our cooperation is not paralyzed by dynamics in this region that might adverse both the Mediterranean dialogue and the ICI in a negative way. But we do recognize the importance also of confidence building. That's why in the Mediterranean dialogue, while cooperation is bilateral, the multilateral dimension, which brings together unique forum in the world, United States, Europe, Turkey, Israel and Arab countries, happens on the level of political dialogue, because we need to try and find through strategic patience still the importance of having a political dialogue, regardless of the differences. Try to make the best of the differences between countries, try to make the best of the richness of diversity. It's difficult, and that's why I started with strategic patience. The same applies, of course, in the Gulf region, where we are very much concerned in NATO, although again, we're not affected because this is an internal issue within the GCC. But NATO appreciates very much the role that the GCC as an institution has been developed in the region. We need a united GCC. We need unity among the countries in the region. Look at Kuwait. Kuwait has built the first country ever, Sheikh Tamar al-Sabah here. He's been the engine of this. A center, a NATO regional center for cooperation there. And perhaps we have to look at this initiative, not only one which helps us, as the agreement that we have, implement individual programs of cooperation, but that's another way to dialogue in a moment difficult. Of course, this is not going to be taken by NATO because NATO has not a political role into this, neither it seeks to have this role. I finished. But of course, you know, the important mediation that the Emir of Kuwait has undertaken in this region can also, through the avenue of cooperation, give us a new opportunity for dialogue. So my call is, let's not give up to pessimism. Let's use cooperative security. Let's look at more than 2 decades of cooperation between NATO and Arab states and Israel. Let's look also at the achievement of 13 years of cooperation in the Gulf, so that if it is true that we share common security challenges and threats, proliferations, weapons of mass destruction, terrorism, the conflict spillover of failing and failed states, but we do share something more important, which are the common aspiration for peace, security, and stability to the benefit of our peoples and of the people of the region. I'll stop here.
Thank you. I'm sure you'll agree with me that we did hear a very interesting statement. I have one brief comment to make on what Mr. DeSantis said about the resolution on Libya. I was not the Secretary General, I was the Foreign Minister of Egypt, and I voted for it. What prompted us to do so? What prompted us to do so was that there was a threat by Gaddafi to destroy Tripoli, and we wanted to apply what has been accepted in the international community as a responsibility to protect. What the background, the rationale behind the request was to stop Gaddafi from destroying a town, a city, which is Tripoli. It was extended after that in New York. I mean, as Arab foreign ministers, we were not responsible for that, but I just want to clarify this point. And you mentioned Ali Zidane, the former prime minister. He was a great man, and he is, and he really had a plan to get rid also, not only to build the forces in the defense forces and security forces, but he had also the idea of, which is very important, the collection of arms. Libya had an arsenal which could satisfy 10 countries. He wanted to collect these arms, and he wanted assistance of EU, NATO, UN, any country was willing to do that. Unfortunately, he managed to get a meeting in Rome to decide on that, and during the meeting he was fired. It did not continue, and we have the results before us now. Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Oded Iran from Israel. I think, Mr. Chairman, you were very fortunate to have such an excellent panel this morning. I want to continue from the point Nicola DeSantis left, and that is the bilateral versus the multilateral ways of cooperation. And as someone who invested a lot of his time in trying to build multilateral regional cooperation with the EU and the NATO, I am still in two minds about this issue. We have security dialogues, very fruitful and very beneficial between Israel and some Arab states, with no much publicity. They are very helpful to everyone concerned. And the question that I am debating is whether, even under the best of circumstances, even when we have full progress and solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, is it wise to come out in formal structures concerning security? Economics, regional cooperation is something else. Security, I'm not so sure. There will be always someone who will claim that this security cooperation is directed against him, and I'm not so sure this is what in the region we need. Iran will claim, Russia will claim, we may have a new player coming from the Far East, China to be precise, and we will be accused that this formal structure is going to be against them. Solutions can be found in an informal way, as they have been found in recent history. For example, the JCPOA with Iran was found by an informal structure. If there is a diplomatic, political security solution to North Korea, it will probably be found outside formal structures. Therefore, I am, or even Syria, solution to Syria, if there is a political involved with security aspects, it will be probably found in Astana, in Geneva, outside the formal structures that we know. And there is always a danger that a United States president will attempt to destroy formal structure, as we witnessed in the last 6 months or so. And I therefore, I'm saying I'm debating the issue, and I want maybe you, Mr. Chairman, you will be very experienced in working in international institutions. I wonder whether the formal, I repeat, formal collective security structures in the Middle East is what we need.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much, sir. It was an extremely enlightening debate this morning. I have just two comments and some questions. Comment about cooperative security. Nobody talked about what we are doing in the Western Mediterranean. We have the 5+5 defense initiative, where Algeria is very active with our neighboring countries, Morocco, Tunisia, Mauritania, and Libya. And there is a very strong cooperative exchange and training among, and I'm talking only about what I know, it's Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, and Morocco. So we do cooperate on security issues, fighting terrorism, fighting illegal migration, fighting trafficking, drug trafficking, armed trafficking, and human trafficking. There is another initiative also concerning the security in the western region of the Mediterranean. That is the initiative of the neighboring countries, the 5 neighboring countries that are Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt, Sudan, and Libya. We are all concerned by the security in Libya. We are doing our best to try to boost an inclusive dialogue with all the parties in Libya, be it the tribes, the clan, the political party, the militia, and what have you, everything. Because our stability depends on the stability of Libya and the security of Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco. So those are two cooperative initiatives that are for the Western region. But there is also something else that I would like to mention. You were talking about I'm sorry, I'm going to maybe just to, on a very light note, to quote a joke that was very much spread in Algeria in all the newspaper when some Middle Eastern GCC country accused another country of financing and helping terrorism. You know what the Algerians said? What the press and the young in Algeria was saying? Oh, this is just like Pepsi Cola accusing Coca-Cola of putting too much sugar in the drink. Because we know who is Pepsi Cola and we know who is Coca-Cola. So the mainstream here, dialogue, I think it's a dialogue. Everybody is pointing to one single country. Let's think about it for just the sake of provocative thinking and brainstorming. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope questions will be rather brief. We have coffee break. I think we all need coffee. And then there is another panel. Yes, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Well, I think there was an old saying in America goes, if it ain't broken, why fix it? The action from your country, my dear lady, have destabilized the most stable region in the Middle East. This story about Qatar supporting terrorism, I think, is becoming to be a very silly story. Qatar is an active member of the international community. There is a daily flight from Doha of warplanes bombing ISIS targets. There is a good relationship between Qatar and the international community, the superpowers. We have done exercise with the
Ambassador, I'm sorry to intervene. Is there a question? Because we
yes,
don't have
I'm coming to the questions. If you try to please the West by saying that Qatar support terrorism, the West understand. And they came to the point where they say, just like this lady says, which Coca-Cola or Pepsi-Cola has more sugar. So I think this is nonsense. You have to stop it. Let's look at what the panel has been saying. Negotiation, good offices, sitting around a table and discuss our differences. This is the most civilized way of discussing disputes. I think dispute is an important scene of the international community's livelihood. Algeria and Morocco have grudged for a long time, but they've never blockaded each other. Your blockade have affected and badly affected the social fabric of the GCC. This will leave a bitter taste for so many years, even if the dispute is solved, whether it will take a long time or short time, it will leave a bitter taste in everybody's mouth. See,
thank you.
Not Qatar has been affected. If we lose $1, you lose 10. If we lose $10, you lose $100. See, the economy has been affected, the family has been affected, students have been affected, business has been affected.
Ambassador, I think you made your point.
So I think we should cut short this story about Qatar supporting terrorism. We have no interest in supporting terrorism. We will be badly affected by terrorism ourselves, you see. And as the emails of Yusuf Al-Utaiba in Washington have died to host the Taliban office. No, please, because this is a story to be repeated. This story being repeated over and over again.
You made your, Ambassador, I'm sorry, but you made your point. You made your
enough
point.
is enough.
That's it.
Enough is enough, my lady.
Yes.
Enough is enough.
Yes, the gentleman.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm from Turkey, and thank you very much for this high level of intellectual exchange. My question is rather quick about the financial part of the story, because we have mentioned so many initiatives here. They are good, but who will finance this at the end? There is one side of the world which is technologically developed and still making so many innovations and making money out of that. On the other side of the world, the Middle East, is relying more on oil and gas. And we know that in the future, oil and gas revenues will be less and less. And yesterday we discussed the social contract between the states and the population. So that might be problematic. The question is, who will finance these initiatives if the Arab nations cannot come together and finance themselves? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, over there. I think after that, one more question, and then we will.
I would like to start by quoting you, Mr. Ambassador, about the situation having been or would have been easily solved. And going back to Ambassador Risso, who said that this is a crisis that could be easily taken as opportunity. If we diagnose the problem, we can solve it easily. I would say that the problem is not that this is a crisis that could be turned into opportunity. It is an opportunity which was unfortunately turned into a crisis. Why? Because we know very well that the problems we have in the Arab world, and I'm now free to talk because I don't belong to any Arab government, I believe, and many of the Arab people believe, that the turmoil which we see is the result of wrong policies by corrupt leaders for 50 years or over that. And the only way to solve that was, or the easy way, as you said, Mr. Ambassador, was to help the people who revolted against those corrupt leaders to take power, the people to take power themselves. But instead of that, unfortunately, the major powers of the world appeased those leaders for a long time, and we know what appeasement to Hitler did. It resulted in a world war. And this is what we witness in the Arab world now. I will talk about Syria in particular. Instead of helping the people to get rid of this dictator who has been playing immensely bad and disrupting and destabilizing role in the Middle East. First, he sent jihadists to Iraq to destabilize Iraq after the invasion, the American invasion. He killed the Prime Minister of Lebanon, Rafiq Hariri, after killing also many politicians. Also, he helped Iran to bring arms to Hezbollah. He did everything possible to destabilize the area. And that's why I said yesterday that Syria is a key for stabilization of the area. But he has been able to stay by support of the major powers in the area and internationally, because he has been able to combine a paradox. He has been able to get the support of Iran and the support of Israel. He protected the Israeli borders, and he allowed Iran to bring weapons and missiles to Hezbollah. And instead of helping the people of Syria to get rid of such dictator, the powers actually helped him to stay. Now, my question is why the major powers of the world do not really combine their efforts to stabilize this area instead of helping those leaders whose security is only concerned with their staying in power, instead of having a regional security that would save not only the region itself, but Europe, which is the vicinity of our world. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ambassador was, I think,
yes, Ambassador. Here, yes, the microphone here.
I'll be very short and I'll ask a question. I'll take the notes of my dear friend Nicola De Santis and Mr. Koch, that the bedrock for cooperative security goes back to political and economic internal reforms. Let's assume that our problems are solved, the Syrian, the Libyan, the Yemeni problem. What programs does the international multilateral system has in cooperation with the Arab League on proper political reforms in Arab countries? And how do you forge this and move forward in order to achieve the cooperative security in its wider sense, including economic development, as Dr. Karim said, for the benefit of our people? And probably, Mr. Al-Arabi, this is a question also for you to shed light on with your expertise at the Arab League.
There is one question there, and that will be the last question.
Okay, thank you very much. I just wanted to highlight the challenges faced by the countries in Africa and the necessity to have a better attention to the neighbors of the neighbors. Because, you know, in the Sahel region, taken in consideration, we have to take into consideration the efforts of the country of the area, especially of Algeria and other countries of the area, to secure their borders. And talking about Egypt, Chad, Mali, Niger, in order to fight against the scourge of terrorism. And also, it's an effort they are doing really to their own security, and they are also contributing to the security of all the area. So my question is, which is the vision for the area of the Sahel? Thank you very much.
Okay, I'll address some of the...
Okay, cool.
Let me start from the easiest one, which was the one that, as usual, the question is better. Any answer one can give from, you know, former Minister Nazar. If the problems are solved, how to support the political reforms? Well, this again requires, this requires, of course, complementarity of efforts. Because NATO, for example, is not a socio-economic organization. It doesn't aspire to do so. But I think that if conflicts are solved in this region, I mean, it's always difficult, of course, to address and answer ifs questions, but for the sake of the argument. NATO can accompany the transformation of societies without interfering with their domestic dimensions in the security sphere. For example, civilian oversight of the military, democratic control of the armed forces. These are not concepts which are quite popular in the region. Nevertheless, we all understand that the chief of the armed forces in democratic countries is the president, the prime minister, is the head of state. Is not somebody who is in the military. So we offer a model. How does it work? Well, you need to have, you know, systems or checks and balances through civilian oversight. So it's what we call democratic control. Now, for many years, we haven't imposed this, but we see increasingly our partners, especially in the Mediterranean dialogue, introducing this concept into their individual programs every 2 years. They have asked us. We offered it. We didn't impose it. Building integrity, a program that we have. How do you embed best accountability in the ministries of defense in terms of practices that, for example, avoid corruption when you do procurement in the armed forces? These are examples of how an institution like NATO can help. I'm sure that if we look at the aspect of complementarity, the European Union, the OSCE, the United Nations can introduce other ways to accompany a process, but a process that has to be started and has to evolve through the dynamics of each country. It is up to each country to develop that. Then I want to address the multilateral versus the individual. There's not, I think, a one answer on this. There's no one-size-fits-all, Ambassador Aran. The issue is that there are some activities that are better done through self-differentiation because each country has its own specificity. So we need the bilateral track so that we can give an answer which is related to the specificity of the country and its own demands. But there are other areas in which, for example, the multilateral political dialogue is essential to build confidence. Ambassador Karem at the beginning said that the Madrid, you mentioned the Madrid conference, and in fact it was that moment in which the Mediterranean dialogue was launched. It was in that moment in which the European Union was talking about the Barcelona process because there was hope for the Palestinian solution. So imagine how important it is to maintain the multilateral dimension of the Mediterranean dialogue when at some point, I don't say if, but when at some point, regardless of the difficulties, there will be perhaps a solution there. Well, we could use this forum which will bring together, again, United States, Europe, Arab countries in that regard. So confidence building is very much a dimension that I see in the multilateral track. Well, I do believe that bilateral cooperation should be, that practical cooperation should remain on a bilateral level.
Thank you.
Yeah, just a few comments. What the international community can bring to the table on political reform, well, certainly it has a lot of experience to build on, but I think the emphasis here needs to be put on the issues of governance and good governance and how to promote this good governance. So capacity building is definitely one. Issues like security sector reform, this is where NATO can play a good role. The complementarity certainly is there. You have different institutions who can play different roles in that sense, and therefore you bring your experience to the table. I would more focus on the concept of good governance rather than the idea of exporting democracy or bringing democracy to the region. I think we need to focus on more fundamental issues there. On the bilateral, multilateral, I think we do need to get away from this idea, and I try to avoid concepts like security architecture or security system or security structures. I think these are too hard terms in anything. I think we need to focus on the process itself, and the process can work on many different levels and actually needs to work on many different levels to support each other. The government level is one, but we also need to have this process below at the civil society level. And that's the more informal level that actually can then feed into the more state level that is needed. So there's again, you need this cooperative security approach at many different levels in order to be actually functioning and effective at the end. And the basis has to be the dialogue aspect, because and this is one of the big deficits I see in the region, is that people don't talk to each other. There needs to be the dialogue needs to be there, and if it cannot exist at one level, you need to promote it at another.
Thank you. Dr. Kenneth?
3 very quick points. I had a very interesting discussion with Colonel Bonsignori this morning. I did not tell him at the time, and I wish to make public now, that Iran has allocated the sum of $1 billion for the issue of cybersecurity. And they have allocated this huge sum of money to the Revolutionary Guard. The second point I wish to speak on is, for those who missed the Cold War, and we heard that many years ago, we have a Cold War in the Middle East. You have a war between Russia and the United States, and they are excelling in what we call role of a spoiler. Whatever happens here is being spoiled, so on and so forth. And my last point is, yes, who is going to finance? Our Turkish colleague gave a good point. And I said earlier in my intervention, we need shepherds. You need shepherds for the formal dialogue. You need shepherds, as someone said here, for track 1, track 2, and even track 1.5 to discuss these issues in the Middle East. But I believe very strongly that our region has been a victim of external, conceptual, and analytical and proactive mistakes by some. And there are two explicit examples that come to my mind. What we heard 5 years ago of a Sunni versus a Shia arc, and I won't say who was behind that, we all know him, and the bet on political Islam to reshape the region of the Middle East. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Yeah, just want to answer Nicola regarding the mistake. It's not a mistake. It's disaster when it's coming to our region. What happened to Iraq is not a mistake. It's a disaster, destabilized the whole region. In Libya, it is also the same. So we cannot call it a mistake. If I'm an Iraqi, I will just put Bush as a criminal in front of the international court if I am Iraqi. Now, with all respect to the ambassador from Qatar here, well, I think the GCC, as I said yesterday, they are not against the regime. They are against the Doha's policies towards GCC bloc, towards intervention in their international affairs. And I think they've been tried to have a dialogue with Doha. At the problem that 2013, Emir Tamim signed an agreement. And in 2014, signed another agreement that he is going to fulfill his promises. The problem that he did not fulfill his promises. So this ongoing problem, starting 20 years, when Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa toppled his father and took the regime, started from there, that the dilemma of the role that Qatar wanted to play a regional role does not, this is a small country with a small population, with a small geography. And I'm not saying a destabilized factor. Egypt, in whole Arab world, supporting militias, moving from extreme policy to extreme policy, hosting all over contradictory cards. The Muslim Brotherhood, the Daesh, the Hamas, everybody is there, and also the nationalists, the Marxists, everybody is playing in Doha. This cannot be, and it's not me. You can ask any security agent working in European country, or they know that you are supporting ISIS, supporting militias, either Shia or Sunni. So dialogue needs a will. Dialogue to build, yes. We wish to. No, I don't think you have the right. This is the last. You can continue with me outside.
Maybe we should stop now.
Thank you.
Yes, I think we should stop now. Well, I have been, I'm going to finish now, and I have been asked you questions, but let me make 2 points very quickly. First of all, a regional organization, Arab League or anything else, exactly as an international organization like the United Nations, there has to be a clear-cut agreement on what should be achieved. Regrettably, in the last several years, the Arab were divided. I think we had a question about Syria. Yes, there were some countries for and some countries against, so you could not find a real line. So I think this is needed to be taken into consideration. You have to get some kind of a consensus to get an international or regional organization to take a line. One consensus sometimes is accepted and adopted unanimously, but then will not be applied. It's a very important matter. For 9 months between 2014 2015, the Arabs were working on an Arab joint force, military force, and it was very promising. For the first time, 2 meetings in Cairo, all the chiefs of staff of the Arab world were there. And we thought that we'd be able to reach agreement. We did almost reach agreement. Text was circulated, then commented upon, then circulated again, and we thought that was it. Then at the last moment, some countries said we need more time to reflect upon it, and they have been reflecting for 2 years now. Nothing came out of it. It's very difficult really to navigate through different countries, how they are going, because everyone has his own concept, his own views, his own interests. But the best thing is to discuss these matters in the open like this, and maybe attitudes will change. Thank you very much, and I thank my colleagues. شكرا دولتك، يعني كفايه انك موجود. شكرا والله العظيم، الله يخليك. ان شاء الله ان شاء الله انا رايح الاسبوع الجاي ان شاء الله ان شاء الله. لا انا هحاول صغير عشان مؤسسه ياسر عرفات مش هعمل حاجه، فان شاء الله مره ثانيه ان شاء الله. تديني الكارت يسعدني جدا جدا. الكارت بتاعي عينيا. I'm going to call everybody.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am the last speaker. Hopefully, I'll get done very early. First, let me thank Ambassador Minuto Rizzo for inviting me to such high-level conference from which I've learned a lot from my predecessor speakers. Benjamin Franklin once said, an investment in knowledge pays the best interest. And I say, investing in communication, cultural education, and international relations pays a great dividend. My topic today is the role of effective communication in times of change, social media networks, and Arab societies. The main points I will discuss are 3, role of effective communications in times of change, major factors affecting Arabs and their geopolitics, and I'll try to give my humble potential solution at the end. Effective communication, in my view, is a process of understanding and sharing information, meaning of verbal and nonverbal stimuli. It is likely to create a supportive climate of interaction between two entities rather than a defensive one. Here I rely on Joe Gibbs, who said earlier, or created these dichotomies that create effective climate of interaction versus defensive one. And as you can see, we witnessed some of this over the past 2 days among our colleagues, some of them. To create supportive climate of communication, we need to describe the issue rather than trying to evaluate the issue and each other. Second, we need to really discuss the problem orientation, rather than trying to control the problem and define it the way we want to do. Ad rem nat ad hominem, the Latin proverb says. You try to attack the issue at hand or the conflict rather than the other entity, otherwise we create a defensive climate of interaction. Third, spontaneity rather than strategy, being empathetic rather than neutral toward the other party, treating others with relative equality rather than superiority, and trying to be provisional rather than certain, because other people may have better intervention than us. The role of media, journalists as watchdogs versus lapdogs. This was introduced by Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein when they really talked about the Watergate scandal under the former Nixon president. And they showed us how they are watchdogs rather than lapdogs. A lot of media journalists used to be, for a long period of time, especially in our Arab region or MENA region, and lapdogs, they try to cover up for their leaders or politicians rather than discovering their ill-doings and wrongdoings to the public, which was one of the major problems that we witnessed. So watchdogs, on the other side, they would really tell the truth and discover those ill-doings or wrongdoings to the public so the public can take care of the issue. And third, the internet and social media networks played a major role in what has been called the Arab Spring. I really don't like to call it Arab Spring. I like what it was said yesterday. We Arab have sandstorms and winds, a lot of winds, rather than Arab Spring, greenery and everything. It started, or the West called it Arab Spring, because they thought that our youth are going to rebel and change the regimes from autocratic to democratic. And autocracy has been, for a long time in our region, and I doubt we would have any democracy soon. So during the time of change, we witnessed reporting and citizen journalism. Everybody became a source of information rather than relying on the mainstream media to tell us what's going on. So a lot of reporters from the field started to really give the mainstream media what's going on, and the mainstream media would go back and inform the general public. So everyone became what we call a source of information. Now, let me just discuss some barriers, elements, features, and tools of effective communication. I'll go very quickly because some of my previous speakers touched upon some of them. First, bypassing. When you really talk and ignore the other party, you don't give them something to say, you try to dominate the discussion all the time. Polarization. And the statement I remember about this is George W. Bush. His name was mentioned earlier, by saying, either you are with us or against us. And we know what happened when Germany and France were against him. I believe Chancellor Helmut Kohl was in power in Germany, and Jacques Chirac was in France. And he called them or labeled them, because when you label other, that would lead to defensiveness between the two entities. He labeled them old Europe, or countries of old Europe. Acting on inferences or assumptions rather than on the facts. A lot of people infer something and they act upon them. Assumptions may be true, however, they are not likely to be true all the time. Stereotyping. We know the stereotypes in the Arab society about Arabs. If something happened, you remember Oklahoma building, I was flying to deliver a talk in Indianapolis when they stopped every Arab that is looking Arab in all major international airports, thinking that was an Arab terrorist act. And eventually, it was an American who was in the army, in the American army, who deserted it after a while. Static evaluation. When we use the verb to be in the present tense all the time, we do not indicate the time, and we don't understand that people can change. Cultures can change. We have to be very careful when we use our language. Racism, sexism, ageism. When we use terminology that do this, that create problems between interlocutors. Distortion of reality or double speaking, saying one thing verbally and behaving in opposite manner non-verbally or without saying it. We know about the American, I hope my American colleagues would not get at me because I'm Lebanese American. And ethnocentricity, when we believe our religion, our values, our standards are the best. And I face this in teaching. I've been teaching for over 35 years. I spent my entire life as a student, teacher, and researcher. And I try to embed in my students that kind of thing. You go to heaven, I go to heaven. Why do we have to treat each other with animosity? Because you have different religion, you're going to go to hell, and I'm going to go to heaven. So I try to do my best in that regard. What are the elements of effective communication? Acquiring knowledge about others, their styles of interaction, valuing differences rather than ignoring them, saving face or being very respectful of each other, accepting others no matter who they are, where they're coming from, no matter how different they are, and treating them with relevant equality. And that's how I deal with my own students. I can tell you right now, out of about 80 to 84 students every semester, I never had a single negative comment. You can check the records at my university, in which I've been teaching for over 16 years. That's the only university I stayed in the UAE 16 years. Other universities, 8 or 10, but that's the university where I like the most, and even I cannot get my kids to go with me to the United States if I want to move back. They want to stay in Dubai. What are some of the features of effective communication? It is fast, reaching the masses of people, outperforming mainstream media, facilitating youth uprising, etc. When I say youth uprising, the MENA region witnessed previous revolt. nationalism, Islamism, and so forth. But this is, Arab Spring is the most important one, and that one that is very transnational from North Africa all the way to the Levant. And it had a lot of effects. The tools of effective communication, definitely the internet and its various applications, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, weblogs, iReporting, and face-to-face interaction, which I would call WAM, word of mouth, which helped Arab youth to rebel. Arab Spring and the role of social media networks in Arab societies. Social media networks mobilized public for regime change, pro-democracy movements in Arab societies. They were very effective, however, they were met by weapons and killing in the streets. If we remember the case in Syria, everybody talk a little bit about Syria. Revolutions or demonstrations started peacefully for about 6 months or more. Then they were met by force, by weapons, by killing, by barrels or whatever, and we cry why the outside world did not help us. It's a very tragic situation, and I don't want to get deeper into that. So Arab youth use social media effectively and a lot better than the elderly population. Honestly, I learned from my own sons about using mobile technology. And mobile technology, this little machine, is used for every single function. For every single function. Radio, transmit, even to download my lectures and read of it. They don't want to read books anymore. They want to read slides because they don't have enough time to read books for 6 or 7 courses in the university. So mobile media have a great effect on youth, and the way they use it is better than anybody else. Wael Ghanem, who is an Egypt Google executive, stated one time, if you want to liberate a society, just give them the internet. The internet has been claimed as effective weapon of the weak and disenfranchised against authoritarian leaders. Why? Because nobody could control the public by stopping the internet. They could stop it for a little bit, but they couldn't. Everybody remembers, I believe, the presidential election 2009 in Iran. I wrote 2 or 3 articles about the issue. Everybody remembers the lady who was killed on the street. I think you remember that. It was discovered, and mobile media got this to the public. That's iReporting. And as I mentioned, citizen journalism, tumultuous events of Arab Spring have been covered by ordinary citizens via Twitter, Facebook, online, and so forth. We can recall after 2011 Arab social media report, 94% of Tunisians got their news from social media tools, as did the 88% of Egyptians. Am I good on time? What are the factors affecting Arab geopolitics? Arab-Israeli conflict and lack of comprehensive solution to it. International powers lack initiative to solve this problem, which is at the core of MENA region. And I can tell you, the Arab-Israeli conflict, especially the Palestinian issue, if it is not resolved, it's going to create more terrorist groups, because it is the one issue and the most important issue that led to the creation of so many terrorist groups in our region. Second, Israeli attitude towards finding a comprehensive settlement. And my friend Odey spoke yesterday. He told me he's going to mention Lebanon about the oil. And I told him I'm going to mention Israel also, because Israel doesn't like to have a comprehensive settlement for probably many hidden agendas or reasons. And a comprehensive solution may not lead to what Israel attempts. However, we really need a comprehensive solution in order to reach peace in the region and have it prosper rather than continuing to fight. Creation and empowerment of non-state actors by regional powers. You know these, some of you spoke about them, and Dr. Al-Ani, Mustafa Al-Ani mentioned them by name yesterday, and this is creating a lot of troubles, especially because some of them became more influential than their own governments. And I don't want to talk about the Lebanese Hezbollah. I am from Lebanon, and all of you have known or read Hezbollah and the relationship between Hezbollah and Iran, and he is used to fight in Yemen, to fight in Iraq, to fight in Syria, and Dr. Mustafa Al-Ani is very well noticed about speaking on Al-Arabiya about this issue. Exacerbation of the problem and declaration of war on terrorism after 9/11/2001. I wish George W. Bush, our former president, knew better than that. And Dr. Al-Khatbi mentioned he should be put in jail. If he were not the president of the most powerful nation, I don't think he would be living peacefully right now. He would be put in jail because he claimed the invasion of Iraq on the presence of weapons of mass destruction, and this was proved to be not true. He was told before the invasion, during the invasion, and sorry, but after the fact doesn't lead to anything. And lately, a last one, devastating results of Afghanistan and Iraq wars. I mean, what did we do in Iraq? It was a stable country. It is devastated. We did not finish, led to the creation of ISIS and so many other terrorist groups, and God knows where we're going to end up with this issue. Factors affecting Arab geopolitics, Arab youth and Arab Spring as transnational diffusion. Arab youth, almost half of the population without much to do. And ex-Prime Minister yesterday, Rifai, mentioned that we have about 70% of the population youth. Yes, we are educating them. We are bringing Western universities into our region. However, we graduate people and they don't have jobs. We are not creating jobs. Why we are not creating jobs? Because most of our leaders, I would not say all of our leaders, most of our leaders try to benefit and to smuggle money outside of their countries at the expense of their own nation and their own people. And that's why when you get people desperate, what's the final thing to do? Is to put a belt of explosive, go and kill themselves to kill others who they believe are against them or from different religion than they are or different political views than they are. They become very desperate. They don't have anything to do. So to lose their life, the Tunisian who started the Arab Spring, burned himself not because he was very happy and living peacefully. He did not have anything to buy, things to eat. Therefore, he did it and started the Arab Spring. Second, Arab Spring and erosion change of traditional regimes. First, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, and Yemen. Arab Spring and changing stance of ruling elites in Bahrain, Jordan, Morocco, aligning with Saudi Arabia. They change their stance depending on what's going on. The latest issue between Qatar and several Gulf states with Egypt is still going on. And we have to understand it very well before we decide what it is like, what's the ambitions, the Muslim Brotherhood, and what to think of it also. The civil sectarian wars in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, interference of regional and international powers, most likely to mention in here United States and Russia. We don't know what the stance of the United States. Every time we have a new president, we have different situation, we have different stance, and that's creating a lot of problems. And the intervention of Russia and bombarding the Syrian people, claiming that they are terrorists. Not all Syrians are terrorists, I believe. The empowerment and engagement of non-state actors, regional leaders used non-state actors such as Kurds, Hamas, Hezbollah, ISIS, etc. in local and regional conflict, and that's very, very crucial. The influx of immigrants from MENA region resulting in terrorist activities in Europe and beyond. The Arab nation state. Okay, let me go then to the potential solution, since we are short on time. My humble solution is that wars do not solve problems. They exacerbate them. However, education and effective communication do lead to solving potential problems. Many of my predecessors talked about education, and I agree with them. We have to educate our youth. And yesterday there was some conflict between religious leaders. Religious leaders, when they try to really deliver speeches, they incite our youth to go and commit certain acts. We know what happened in a lot of madrasas in Afghanistan, in Pakistan. And religious leaders are the best teachers that can influence our youth, not me. As a professor of intercultural communication and cultural relations, I always tell my students, if you get out of my class with 3 major concepts, accepting others, no matter who they are, where they're coming from, and respecting them, would lead you to a good disciple. So acceptance of others, respect, and treating them with relevant equality. If each one of us would do these things, we can really help in solving a lot of major problems. It has to be so simple. So life should not be complicated and can be made simple via the following 4 principles. Giving youth something to do in life rather than going and killing themselves. Advising youth to love someone or something. Teaching youth to have a strong belief in something and giving youth something to hope for or dream about, and getting them out of these people who ask them to go and really kill themselves to kill others. So we have to have trust, commitment, and love that will ensure applying these principles for a better life in the MENA region and beyond. Unfortunately, some of our leaders do not take good care of their youth and citizens in general. Instead, they enrich themselves at the expense of their own compatriots. And thank you.
Well, I don't know if there are questions. It's been very clear, the professor. I mean, I don't think that there are doubts in our mind on the kind of messages that he was sending. So perhaps there is no need for clarification on that. So I can say that perhaps we are at the end of our conference, And I would like at the end, thank you all, first of all, for coming here, for staying here with us. I know how difficult it is to be, I say, a member of the audience, because I am a member of the audience myself all the time, and I know that, you know, sometimes you have a pressure of time, and I'm very proud of the fact that I see so many people at 1 o'clock, 6th of October, here after many hours of debate and discussion, and I think this is a good success. I think we try to go over as many issues as possible. Of course, we have not covered everything, because I think, I don't remember, it was perhaps Ahmad yesterday who said, you know, if you want, we can spend 2 days on one of this, on these issues, because the Arab world is in turmoil. Let's not deny that. You know, we are very polite all, and we try always to understand and to go beyond and to find avenues. The fact is that there is a crisis there, and we have also to help to find collective solutions, as we try to explain over to these 2 days. We have not touched all the points, but I try to organize things in such a way that there is some kind of distribution, because we have the political part. Yesterday it was state integration and disintegration. Then we had an economic point of view, including energy. This morning about external actors, internal actors, how you can go beyond this. And finally, the professor with his general view about mass communication and how people learn or should learn to behave in a certain way. So I thank you very much. As I say, this is the 4th time that the foundation is organizing things on the Arab Junction. We hope to be able to continue this. It will depend on many factors, of course. We will try our best. So I thank you again. And before closing, I have to thank my young collaborators. There. Because without them, it would not be possible to organize such a thing. Thank you very much. Have a good day, Rob.
Yes, I'm still a teacher. Sharjah, American University of Sharjah, the Emirat. هاي سادس مرة بيعزموني من نيتو إلا أتكلم عنه. سادس مرة. Great. Thank you. Thank you very much.